Hello, welcome to Two Cups, One Kettle. Today we are going to be talking about one of my favorite things, ancient Egypt, and specifically one of my favorite stories of ancient Egypt. So grab yourself a cup and let's get into it. Today I am going to be drinking multiple liquids, water, tea, maybe some red wine, and we're going to light a candle and we're going to talk about ancient Egypt. One of my favorite things to really talk about, learn about. I've always loved ancient Egypt since I was a little girl in elementary school. It started out with Percy Jackson getting me into mythology in general. And then it quickly progressed into somewhat of an obsession that led me towards Rick Riordan's Kane Chronicles, which is the Egyptian Percy Jackson, essentially. And I read them and I loved them. And today we're going to be talking about Pharaoh Akhenaten, which is a very difficult period in Egyptian history because there's a lot of changes that happened in a relatively short time, considering at this point in time, 3,000 years worth of Egyptian history has already happened. And all of this happens in 20 years, I believe, possibly 30 if you're including successors and the pre happenings. But it's a very fun thing, and there's a lot of interesting ancient Egyptian myths and history. And one of my other favorites is about the trial room of Osiris with Anubis, because in the Kane Chronicles, Anubis was definitely a hottie, and I was down for that. And there is the myth about your heart being weighed against a feather, and it's a very cool thing. But we're going to get into Akhenaten. So, buckle up because this is going to be a very fun one for me and hopefully for you too, because it is quite the roller coaster. So, Akhenaten was a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt. And this particular era of Egypt was essentially Egypt at its peak. It was a very peaceful time, it was prosperous, they were very, very rich. It was the golden age of Egypt. Um, it was around the 1300s BCE when all of this was happening, but we're going to go back a little bit before Akhenaten, back to his daddy. So his father, Amenhotep III, ruled during this time of stability, wealth, not democracy. Um, there was a lot of diplomatic things going on. It was just a very peaceful time. And it was said that gold was essentially as common as dirt in this period of time. They were just rolling in riches. And it was also just a huge territory. Egypt was probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, kingdoms of this time. They were vast, huge nation filled with wealth, military might. They had a lot of art going on. There were huge building projects that were happening at this time, like the Luxor Temple and the Colossi of Memnon. But they also controlled Nubia and Levant, which were kind of key cities at that point in time. So Akhenaten, Amenhotep III's son, who we're going to be talking about, he essentially inherited the strongest possible version of Egypt. He could have coasted his whole life and been completely fine, and the kingdom would have been probably great, honestly. He really had it easy. He is the most Nepo baby of all Nepo babies, and he wasn't even supposed to be king. So The Egyptian religion at this point in time and most time was a polytheistic religion. That means there were many gods, and all of the gods were kind of depictions or the forces of nature incarnate. They all had something that they were depicting, something that the Egyptians relied on or just happened all the time that they needed some explanation of why this happened. And like the rain, the rivers, the Nile was a god. There was just all kinds of gods. The sun, which is going to be a huge part of today, the different sun gods. But everything just needed an explanation because they didn't have as much science as we do now. So everything had a god, essentially. And Pharaoh was the intermediary between the gods and mankind, the humans. And so Pharaoh has such a huge part in history at this point in time. They are the big daddy-os. And that is what Amenhotep the third was. He was Pharaoh. And so his sons were obviously in line for the throne. So one of the most major deities at this point in time, which this is really important, was Amun Ra. And Amun Ra was a fusion of both Amun and Ra, and they were both sun gods. And that makes sense. The sun was worshipped most because everything comes from the sun back in ancient Egypt. All of the everything revolves around it. That's what kind of gives life in a way. And so there were powerful priesthoods that were dedicated to Amun Ra, and Akhenaten's daddy, Amenhotep III, put a huge emphasis on sun worship at this time, and he also claimed that he himself was semi-divine. And if I'm remembering correctly, he ended up creating this rumor that Amun Ra then disguised himself as Amenhotep's father to then essentially sleep with his mother to then create Amenhotep, which gave him this direct connection to the gods, to the divine, and gave him an even closer sense of power, more so than any pharaoh had done to that point, because they just kind of either took on the deity as themselves or just had a super intimate relationship with these gods at the time. But Amenhotep wasn't pleased enough with that. He needed to go a step further. And so he claimed that Amun Ra was his daddy. Kind of crazy. But then Amenhotep III ended up obviously having children, and one of them was Amenhotep IV. And Amenhotep IV is Akhenaten. His original Akhenaten's name originally was Amenhotep IV. He was named after his father, and he's eventually going to change that, which we'll get into that later. But he was actually the second son. He was the spare, the replacement. His older brother Tutmos was heir to the throne. So Amenhotep wasn't meant to be pharaoh. So he joined the priesthood. He was in school there. That's where he kind of planned that he was going to live his life. He wasn't going to be a ruler. He was just going to kind of coast along and just get really into this. So he also, keep in mind, he was a very involved, he was extremely involved with the religious aspect of Egypt because that was his thing, that was his job. But then Tutmos unexpectedly died young, quite young, which then thrust Amenhotep into the role of king in 1353 BCE. I think I forgot to mention, but Amenhotep was born around 1380 BCE. So this has been, oh, what's that? I think 27 years, I believe. So he's about 27 at this point, we believe. Um, so he's then thrust into the role of king, of pharaoh. And it's widely believed that he co-ruled with his father briefly until his father died. So he kind of got, I guess, a crash course, but that wasn't what he was groomed to be. He started out pretty normal as a pharaoh. He worshipped the traditional gods. He built temples in Karnak and participated in the normal rituals, and he's depicted in the standard art style for a little bit. But there is a festival called the Sed Festival, which is normally held at the 30th year of a ruler's reign. And Amenhotep then holds this festival, the Sed Festival, in his third year of reign, which is kind of a huge red flag because you're supposed to wait until 30 and he's doing it at the third. What is this guy doing? He claimed that it was the continuation of his father's rule. So he kind of took what his father did for himself and kind of claimed it so then he could do this festival. And during this festival, this is really important, he elevates Aten as the central deity. And keep in mind, it used to be Amun Ra. It is now Aten. So who's Aten? What is this Aten guy doing here? Well, Aten takes the shape of the physical disk of the sun, and I drew you a very wonderful picture here. Um, it's the sun. It looks like a disk with the sun, and at the time before Amenhotep the fourth, it was not a super heavily worshipped deity. It was a like a minor manifestation of Ra at this time, and Akhenaten then elevated this minor manifestation of Ra to a supreme status, and he shifted it to become the sole focus of worship at the time. So this is completely out of pocket. It's crazy. So Amenhotep, during his fifth year of reign, changes his name to Akhenaten, which means the effective for Aten. So he removed Amen, because keep in mind, his name was Amenhotep. He removed the part that meant Amen from his name. And he then publicly broke his association with the traditional god Amen and named himself Akhenaten, which literally has Aten in it. So he has now connected himself to this deity that he is now elevated to the utmost status, Aten. He then suppresses the existence of Amun Ra. And in order to do this, he redirected the temple funds. He removes the name of Amun from everywhere. He defaces carvings, he gets rid of it. He erases the images all across Egypt. He's just trying to get rid of this guy and all memory of him. And then he strips the priesthood of their power. And at the time, Amun had a very powerful priesthood. It was a huge thing. He was the main deity. So his priesthood was pretty powerful, had a lot of funding going to it. And then Amenhotep, now Akhenaten, just gets rid of that. He completely moves on from it. And then he not only does that, he moves the capital from Thebes to Amarna. And Thebes was the center of Amun's power. So he's now completely detached everything about Egypt's center and its religion from Amun. And part of the reason that he moved it was to reduce the priesthood rebellion and fighting back because this was a huge thing to do. And he moved it to Amarna, and the ancient city name for Amarna was Akhenaten, which means horizon of the Aten. So you'll notice Aten is starting to become a huge thing here. But he wants to start over in the city of um, Amarna so that he can just have a clean slate from Amun. So, in this place, Akhenaten rapidly built up the city out of mud bricks. It was a very fast building, and he included Aten into not only the architecture, but also he took into account the geography of the area that he was in. So, there were these cliffs, and he built the city to then face the cliffs. So, then every morning when the sun rose, it was framed by these cliffs. And keep in mind the what it looked like. It was that disc with all of the lines coming out, and it looked like it was being framed by these cliffs. So it had a very beautiful symbolic nature, and it was something that kind of dedicated the city to Aten. And he also built 16 boundary stelae that were carved into the cliff sides that were surrounding where the sun would come up, and had open air temples which required the sun. So all of the things that he built really needed the sun and really emphasized that. And not only that, he ended up creating some rituals that he did, like an annual chariot ride throughout the city as an offering to this god, Aten. So Akhenaten has completely rattled Egypt. He has shifted the polytheistic culture of Egypt that had been around for 3,000 years, 3,000 years of history of polytheism, and then changes it towards a almost monotheistic culture, complete 180 turnaround. And another thing that changed during this time was the artwork. So, artwork before Akhenaten was, especially regarding the pharaoh, was kind of this idealized, strong, muscular, very male kind of figure, and the women were very effeminate and soft. And so there were just very specific styles that were used before him. But during the artwork changed to something that was more feminine or androgynous, especially regarding the pharaoh. The body had narrow shoulders, a protruding belly, almost as though pregnant or a beer belly in a way. They had wider hips. The skulls were elongated, kind of Indiana Jones style, the crystal skull. And not only that, there were more intimate family scenes that were being depicted, which weren't really utilized before. This could have been a symbolic merging of the masculine and the feminine divine traits, or an attempt to try and embody Aten, which was a genderless disk, a representation of the sun. There is no gender to the sun. Or maybe it could have been a literal depiction. Maybe Akhenaten was a very slender man with a very round belly. We don't know that. I mean, it's been how many thousands of years? Sue me, I don't know. But uh, because of all of this, it was a huge change from what had been depicted before. And along with this, there was also an increased realism in the art at this time. And like I said before, the familial affection that was depicted was much more than before. And it kind of showed the woman as being an equal. So Nefertiti, yes, Nefertiti, we could have a whole other video about her. What a woman. But Nefertiti was Akhenaten's wife. She was the queen of Egypt. And she was being depicted as equal in size as Akhenaten, which has not happened before. Most of the time, the queen would end up being depicted as being smaller in stature, which would probably have been true just based on how men and women are physically built. But in all of the depictions, Nefertiti, not Nefertiti, I'm sorry, Nefertiti was depicted as equal in size. So, like I said before, Nefertiti was Akhenaten's wife. She's the queen of Egypt and the chief consort of the pharaoh. But she also is a huge figure at this time. She is depicted nearly as often as Akhenaten, and is often seen doing kingly acts like smiting enemies. And this has never really been documented before. A woman, especially in this role, is now taking on kingly duties and is very possibly a co-regent. And it's kind of theorized that by the 16th year of Akhenaten's rule, she is most likely a co-regent with Akhenaten. So they were almost depicted as having the same level of power and what's that word? Hold over Egypt. I can't think of the word. There's a word and I'll remember it later. Sorry. Um, but in year 12 of Akhenaten's reign, she disappears from the record. She is never depicted again. She is gone. And that is where the mystery of Nefertiti comes into play. She's also said to have been the most beautiful woman in all of Egypt and in all of the world at the time. And we keep finding things of these images of her, and she's the one with the famous bust, which, if I'm not too tired when I edit this, I might try to include some pictures of some of these things. But she's this awesome figure, one of the greatest mysteries in all of ancient Egypt. And around the same time, a mysterious ruler, Nefer, a mysterious ruler, Neferneratuen, Neferon, Neferneferatuen, it's a very long name, I apologize, appears. Just out of nowhere, this person appears, and as a ruler, nonetheless, not just some rando, it is a ruler. And it's kind of debated and theorized that it's possibly Nefertiti ruling independently, so she had to take on a man's role and be a man so that she could be pharaoh independently. I'm inclined to believe them because Nefertiti disappearing and then Neferuatun appearing at almost the same time is a little bit too coincidental. Think of it what you will. I'm inclined to agree with the people who think that they're the same person. But moving on, she's just gone. Akhenaten then dies.
Egyptians believed the most significant thing you could do in your life was die.
In the 17th year of his rule. And this is when Neferuatun rules briefly after. And then it transitions into Tutankhamun, originally Tutankhaten, keep that in mind, Aten, who is son of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. And yes, that is the King Tut. So also another cool thing is that two of the most prolific people in all of ancient Egyptian history are from this time. Nefertiti, King Tut, are you joking me? What an awesome time in history. But King Tut, Tutankhaten, restores Amun as a highly worshipped god and reopens the temples and returns the capital to Thebes, which was the original power of Amun. And he changes his name from Tutankhaten, Aten, to Tutankhamun. So he literally takes Aten out of his name, throws it out, and then brings back in Amun. He just does a little swipsy daisies, and now he's changed the religion back to Amun. So he's kind of doing like a screw you, dad, and bringing back everything that his dad was kind of like trying to get rid of and throw away with. And he ends up being like, nah, dad, Amun and I kind of buddies. And I just think that's kind of funny. But continuing on, after King Tut dies, which we know tragically he died young, and if I'm remembering correctly, I did not look this up beforehand. I think he died around 19. I think that's what is commonly said. I could be completely wrong on that one. I'm so sorry. I did not research King Tut when I was making this. Maybe next time. But he dies fairly young, and then the next pharaoh is Horemheb. I think that's how you say it. And Horemheb aggressively erases Akhenaten. He is trying to get rid of all memory of this man. He destroys Amarna, which was Akhenaten's capital. He chisels out and defaces things that have Akhenaten. He removes Akhenaten from the physical world. And he also removes him from the king's list. And that's pretty intense. Not only did you not like what he did and just like undid everything, you also erased him from not only every physical copy of anything that had his name on it, but also the king's list, the list of pharaohs. You have erased him. You've said you are awful. That's really petty. But this is actually has a name. It's called the Damnatio Memoriae, which means the condemnation of memory. So pretty vindictive and hardcore, if you ask me. But what's kind of ironic about Horemheb erasing and destroying Amarna, the capital city of Akhenaten's reign, is that because of Amarna's abandonment, the there was no later construction that could affect the original city. And so, because of that, archaeologists were able to find the city preserved, very well preserved, if I might say. And now, because of that, we are able to actually understand daily life at the time uniquely well. There's not really many other cities in ancient Egypt that were preserved this well. And all of it is because of Horemheb trying to erase Amarna. He actually ended up leading it to its historical preservation, which I think is pretty ironic considering what he was trying to do. And I just find this whole story kind of interesting because Akhenaten tried to erase 3,000 years of history, and then his successors were all kind of like, we're gonna erase you, buddy. What can we say? So I just find that really funny. But I just think that this whole story is crazy. I think it's so fun, and I find it so interesting that one man who had an insane amount of power and wealth was able to, during his reign, completely undo 3,000 years worth of religious culture to then change it to something monotheistic, which is so wild to me. And also, Akhenaten was not exactly a great ruler. He was kind of a sucky ruler. During this time, there ended up being a lot more discontentment because not only did he change this, it's not like he just changed this for him, he changed it for the entire nation of Egypt, all of its cities. So you're king, you've been living this way, your parents, your parents' parents, your entire like family line has been worshiping these specific gods for thousands of years, legitimately thousands. And you've grown up in this culture, and then all of a sudden there's a switch, and it's not just like some random cult leader came in or some weirdo with fanatic views came in and just started speaking it. It is your pharaoh who is your connection to the gods, which is just it's just so insane to me. Like, imagine how crazy that must have felt, that your connection to the gods is telling you that everything that you have believed is wrong, and you need to start believing this now. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is what you have to believe. That must have been so world altering that I just, I don't know. I find it very interesting to think about what those people must have felt like at the time. And especially coming from a time of extreme peace and prosperity to then you end up having priesthood revolutions and discontentment and a whole religious rehaul. It's just an insane time to think about. And you also have King Tut and Nefertiti thrown in there. Nefertiti, like the hottest woman ever. King Tut, the boy king. King Tut the tomb. Just King Tut in the Valley of Kings. You're kidding. That must have been crazy too. Also, I think a lot of the names are funny. Horemheb, the city of Akhenaten. I think it's kind of funny too that all of the names are kind of similar. I'm just rambling at this point, I suppose. But I just find it all very interesting and fun. I'll tie it up now. Akhenaten tried to erase 3,000 years of tradition. His successors tried to erase him. It seems that history keeps what it wants, and sometimes what its people try hardest to forget. I hope you had an amazing time listening to me ramble on about one of my favorite ancient Egyptian stories. I know I had a blast. And the candle, it smells amazing too. Um, it smells like petrichor, which is that the smell after it rains. But it actually, this candle, it smells to me like Jamaica on the resort after it rains. There's that smell in the air when you walk out, and this candle smells exactly like that, and it brings me so much happiness because every time I've gone there, I've had a blast, and I end up having the best time with friends, family, loved ones. I just always have a great time there, and it smells like happiness and joy. I love the smell. I also just love the smell of rain and wet dirt, which I know is mud, but I like the smell of wet dirt after the rain. Chef's kiss. Beautiful. Anyways, thank you for joining me. Um, oh, I guess I should probably mention it's just me this week. Elena is not here this week, and last week there was no episode because I had the Black Death. I had the plague. I had the mutant cold of all colds, derived from some form of, I don't know, satanic ritual. It was the worst. I had a really crappy sickness. So I didn't make an episode last week because honestly, I was really icky. I was really icky. So sorry. We're picking it back up now. And I didn't know if I was gonna make one this week or not because I'm still kind of recovering, but hopefully there will actually be a guest next time. I'll actually try and really set things up. I've been kind of not wanting to talk to too many people in these couple of weeks. I've just been having a blast making D&D worlds and multi-page notes on ancient Egyptian history and playing. That will be resolved. We will be back with your normal podcast. Maybe. Maybe this will turn into the Gabby show. Who knows? Could always happen. You'll be hearing a lot more about ancient Egypt if that's the case. So either you're welcome or I'm sorry. Anyways, I know I just rambled the last 5 minutes, but I hope you had an amazing time like I did. I will see you next week on Tuesday because we're going to get back to it. I'm going to fix things. On Tuesdays, where who knows what the next subject will be? It could be anything that I want it to be. And you can't stop me. That's well. I hope you had a great time. Tell me what you were drinking in the comments below. I will see you next week. And cheers, lads. Dude, Philomena Conk though, just saying. Love Philomena Conk. Ooh. Watch Kunk on Earth, it's hilarious. It is gold. Toodles!